all anyone can talk about anymore is Trump and his tariffs. But that seems to be about all that is driving markets, which really comes down to two things: fear and uncertainty, which are top of mind for virtually all major investors. And they're using every single rally to the upside to sell off as markets and assets struggle to maintain range highs. And this is because of the hostile tensions between the United States and China, as China seems ready to retaliate. Now, in the case of most countries, the US could probably do without their product or manufacturing and figure it out along the way. But with China out of the picture, this would be a hard blow to consumers and companies in the United States, as China is the second largest economy in the world by GDP. At number 3, you have Germany, which is only 4.5 trillion relative to China's $17 trillion. Now, just a few days ago, we were set to impose 104% tariffs on China, and then Trump went ahead and said, no, we are going to increase it to 125%. This singular decision could be the nail in the coffin for China and force their hand into an all-out trade war. And Trump is not only seeking to stand firm on his position, but is also seeking to escalate tensions, which could last longer than anyone would actually hope for. In his latest move, he seems to want to move the battle line even further. And in this post from Charles Gasparino, he's basically stating that they want to delist virtually all major Chinese companies from US exchanges. In other words, if they do this, China might do more, and ultimately there's just this downward spiral that's going to harm markets in the short term. Even if not the actual actions do, the fear and uncertainty will cause market investors to sell. Still, the whole situation between China is quite interesting, because maybe that is why the 10-year bond yield has now been climbing to upwards of 4.42% when it was down at a low of 3.8% just this week. Now, this is typically a deviation from the norm in situations where the yield tends to actually go down when markets are dumping because there is more demand. There's a flight to safety. But right now, they're actually going up, which doesn't really make sense. It's pure chaos and confusion. Many are speculating the yields are up because China and other global players might just be dumping their US treasuries and debt in order to fight back and damage the almighty dollar. But will this work, and how will this affect crypto markets? Even more shocking is the fact that we experienced some extremely positive news that core CPI inflation just came in at a reading of 2.4%, which was lower than expected, and typically markets would rally hard into something like this in a good market environment. But right now, it seems markets are actually shrugging it off and pretending like it didn't even happen, even though that this is the first time that this has happened since March of 2021. Now, I understand a lot of this might sound like a lot of macro mumbo jumbo or jargon, but each piece of news that I cover here is going to affect your crypto bags, especially in a situation like right now, and will likely continue to move markets over the upcoming weeks and months. So what I'm going to do is my best to cover this news in the simplest possible manner, so you leave this video with a solid game plan of what to do next with your portfolio. Now, that said, this is not financial advice. This is for education and entertainment purposes only. You make your own decisions with your money in crypto and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, I just hope to give you a bit more clarity. So in this video, I'll also be covering the Ripple and SEC case. I'll be covering a bullish video from Anthony Pompliano on what he believes is going to happen in 2025, which is actually quite interesting and a good theory. And finally, something else on the development side when it comes to crypto markets and altcoins from Miles Dutcher, which is actually quite educational. So as always, even if the markets ain't looking too bullish, if you're still feeling blessed, comment 777. And if you're going to be the wealthiest person in your family tree, smash the subscribe button. Hello and welcome back to the channel, my friend. If you're new here, my name is Paul, and you can find me on Twitter or X at PaulieDeFi, PaulieDeFi. DEFI. I'm going to cover some of this news really quickly, and at the end of the day, we're going to look at the price action on the chart because I think it's equally important to know kind of what's happening if you're not looking at it daily. Obviously, many of you see what's happening in your portfolio, but don't really have clarity on what happens next, especially among all of this volatility and just uncertainty, because yes, what Trump is doing right now has obviously been affecting virtually every risk on market. That includes TradFi markets like stocks, it's affecting bonds, and it's also affecting crypto. Crypto is arguably getting hammered the worst because crypto is typically viewed as a more volatile market. So managers, or fund managers, I should say, are more likely to want to sell that stuff, especially because it's less liquid as well. There's less money in it, so it's easier for it to dump on the same amount of money or capital. Now, that said, Trump recently announced a 90-day pause on many of the tariffs between nations to work out new deals because 75 different nations called in and said they wanted to work out a deal. And that was great, especially because he posted, "Do not retaliate and you will be rewarded." In other words, the world is ready to work with Trump on global trade, except for China. China chose the opposite direction. And in other words, China escalated by having higher tariffs. They announced this in Beijing, and the tariffs will be 84% on US goods, which is set to take effect on Thursday. Then Trump responded in like that effective immediately, the United States would charge a 125% tariff on China. In other words, we pumped pretty hard and nice about upwards of like 12% on Bitcoin and the stock market, and almost 20% on XRP on the news of the 90-day pause. But then the next day we saw no follow through, and stocks renewed their sell-off as the China trade war sinks in. Combine that with another bold move from the Trump admin, which is moving toward a possible delisting of the Chinese public co-shares on US exchanges. Now, they're concerned about the so-called golden shares, which grant the Chinese government control over these listed shares, and they are going to have Paul Atkins, who was recently confirmed and is pro crypto, which is awesome, looking into this whole situation. In other words, we actually have to be able to inspect their books and make sure that no one in the Chinese government is involved, which is highly unlikely for any major stocks that are listed inside of the United States. That is one key point or lever of control for China, and they would obviously lose it, and this would harm them and cause them to maybe want to retaliate even further. And then combine this with the fact that US inflation fell to 2.4%, below expectations and the lowest since March of 2021. And yes, you can see it right here, Thursday, April 10th, we got a core CPI reading year over year below expectations. They were expecting 2.5%. We got a 2.4% reading. And typically in a very healthy market environment, like I said earlier, what would happen is the stock market would pump pretty hard because it's very positive for markets, right? Lower inflation means it's likely that the Fed is going to lower interest rates. And when they do, that should spur some economic activity, right? But at the end of the day, that's not what happened. If anything, we actually saw no follow through on the day. And this candle right here on the S&P looks really weak. Yes, we had some dip buyers right here from 5,100 up to 5,260, but we have zero wick to the upside and nothing closing above the range high of this $5,400 candle. In other words, the market looks pretty weak right now, even with this pump. And all of this uncertainty has led to a situation where volatility remains unreasonably high for a sustained period of time. I mean, we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight days of upside. And by the way, these closes consistently have been higher since the last time we were here in August of 2024. These are higher closes than we've experienced back going all the way to March of 2020 during the coronavirus pandemic. In other words, if Trump or China make any more bold moves, yes, markets are likely going to sell off. And so in most situations and circumstances, people just don't want to hold through that volatility, especially fund managers. It might potentially harm them if there's more downside, which leads me to believe there's potential for more selling. And that's just to de-risk. But if everyone's trying to sell all at once and one major bad piece of news comes out, that's going to be bad. You can't just sell when you want to. You have to sell when you have to, especially when you're moving billions of dollars. And by the way, the people moving billions of dollars could harm your crypto portfolio. Now, the reality is I'm not trying to scare you out of the markets, right? Most of us are really up on XRP. Most of us are really up on things like Bitcoin, unless of course you bought at like $3, or in this case $100,000 on Bitcoin. But still, there may be some better opportunities for buying dips on things like XRP, as Bitcoin is already down quite heavily, down to 79,000. XRP just got sold off to about $1.96. And so here we have the Trump pump. Then yet again, right here on March 19th, we had the news of Ripple officially winning the lawsuit and actually getting a more favorable settlement with the SEC than expected. But you'll notice that all of these highs are coming in lower than the previous all-time high and have failed to put in new highs, which leads me to believe we're in for newer lows. If this was all those moves could make, well then guess what? It's likely you're going lower. And that's exactly what we called for on the channel over and over and over again, especially through this time frame. And then we put in a new low. And by the way, Trump announced the pause right here on tariffs for 90 days. And again, we're failing to see follow through, and we're also failing to see a new high above $2.15, which again leads me to believe that we're going to go lower. What also leads me to believe we're going to go lower, and again, this is not to get all bearish and scare you completely out of your positions. It's just a great time to potentially, de-risk a little, have a little bit of cash sitting on the sidelines to buy some dips down to 150 or potentially even lower to like 110, is the fact that we were supported here pretty consistently at the $2.05 range down to 195 range. Okay, and so in this range right here, when we broke down, you can see what used to be a support now becomes a resistance. And so many of you might not be sitting on as much cash as you wish you would have. However, there is good news. If you are wanting access to more cash to potentially buy a dip over the upcoming months in crypto and XRP, and you're a business owner, whether you were paying W-2 employees in 2021 or you were self-employed in 2021, you could potentially get up to 150K or even 32K, but you have to file this before April 15th. And by the way, because they're going to be so freaking busy over the weekend, highly recommend that you do it sooner rather than later, because it is first come, first serve. So you might not hear back from them for a while if you don't get this filled out before the weekend. And yes, this is totally free money you would get back. This is very similar to the Visa MasterCard deal that we're running, which will be paid out sometime probably in May. But that said, the deadline on this one is April 15th, and Nick explains it extremely well. So we're going to watch this short video.
April 15th, 2025. This is a huge date because it's the deadline for 2 high-paying tax credits that you probably haven't heard about, but you can still get if you take action right now. We've partnered with the relief consultants who are experts in the tax code, who've recovered over $100 million for their clients so far. So if you're a business owner or an entrepreneur, listen up so we can get you help and reach our goal of recovering $10 million for the Bull Runners community before the April 15th deadline. So here's how it works. If you're a business owner who had employees in 2021, then you qualify for an average $150,000 check from the Treasury and possibly more with the Employee Retention Credit Program. So if you were told in the past that you don't qualify, get a second opinion now through the link in the description below this video, because there are rules and regulations that have changed just recently. So there's a high likelihood that you do qualify now. And if you sold your business or you shut it down, you still qualify as long as you were active in 2021. So don't miss out. Schedule an appointment with the link below. Just click business owner with employees if it applies to you. There's also a second tax credit that also ends April 15th. So this is for the bull runners who are self-employed in 2021. So if you were a 1099, not W-2, and self-employment was your primary income, the Treasury check for this tax credit can go up to $32,220 with an average of $17,000. So if you were self-employed in 2021 and want to see if you haven't claimed this credit, which nobody has from our community thus far for some strange reason. We've been talking about this in several videos. I don't know, man, maybe you just want the treasury to keep your money, but if you want to get money back in your pocket, then schedule a consultation. Don't be lazy. Do this right now before April 15th through the link below. Just click self-employed if you think you qualify for both credits. Let the rep know on the call. And by the way, if you have your tax returns from 2020 and 2021 for this credit, it will be a faster turnaround for you. So have them ready on your call, and they can literally tell you if you qualify on your first call to get you paid. So if you need more money back in your pocket for this bull run, take action right now, click the link, and let's get you paid.
So there you have it, folks. Be sure to click on the link, the very first link you see below for the relief consultants, and you should see a form like this pop up. Go ahead and book that consultation. It's very quick, and you'll find out within minutes whether or not you're going to get probably anything back. But it's better to check now rather than regret it and then miss out on potentially thousands of dollars back in your pocket. Now, that said, looking at these charts, I'm going to be honest with you. Listen, let's level with you a little bit. I've consistently called for lower lows, actually going back into this Trump pump, because here you could have been uncertain. It might have actually continued rallying. But the fact that we failed to see any follow through led me to believe, and then with a newer lower low, led me to believe that virtually every single pump you'd want to start to sell into. And that's exactly what we've been calling for and doing. And so these types of plays right now are the types of plays, any pump, that you might want to take a little bit off the table. Again, this is not me giving financial advice or telling you to sell your entire investment portfolio. This is me simply saying sometimes it's nice to have a bit of extra cash on the sidelines to buy dips, considering we are officially in an intermediate term downtrend, and it's very difficult once you're in this type of a move for the entire ocean and all of the tides to turn in the opposite direction. Instead, you want to swim with the tides. And in my personal opinion, it's easier to be short or to sit on cash. And so it really doesn't help that even from the crypto developer activity, going back to 2018, in a post from Miles, talks about how the current state of the industry is relatively sad. Now, this does not apply to XRP and Ripple, as they are consistently adding new functions, features, business partners, banks, and recently acquired a major broker and clearing house for $1.25 billion that clears about $3 trillion in transactions per year. That is completely separate from the fact that the entire altcoin market has been struggling. And that's because there's a lot of really good developers that came into crypto in the early days and in the first few bull markets going into 2021. But many of those really good developers have actually left, and they're doing other things like AI. And right here you can see that there is a chart, and the source would be Artemis, where we've seen a consistent growth and a trend to the upside in terms of developer activity. But going back to 2023, there's been less and less developers. Many of them are led probably into other fields and industries, but typically this type of a trend is very indicative of growth in the sector. This type of a trend going back to 2022, topping off and then declining into 2023 is indicative of decline in a sector. If there are no developers, it's probably because there's no products that people or users are using in that industry. Now, I'm not saying that there really isn't real value around stablecoins, real world assets. We're obviously going to need blockchain technology and oracles like Chainlink. What I am saying is that much of the altcoins that we think about and hold are eventually going to decline and go to zero, and very few will eat up the majority of the market in the same way Bitcoin does. And I do believe XRP is one of those, and it's proving itself. It's currently outperforming the rest of the market. This is a very good chart relative to even, for example, Bitcoin. Bitcoin actually looks weaker, right? This was its top, and look how much further down it is over here relative to XRP. Or Ethereum, absolutely getting slaughtered, down from the $4,000 range to $1,500, and back at ranges that we haven't seen since October of 2023 and even March of 2023. This is one of the worst charts I've seen for a major altcoin. So yes, XRP making new highs and holding a range leads me to believe that this is going to be one of those players that sucks up the majority of the liquidity, which is why it's nice to sit on a little bit of cash, and which is nice, it's that you might potentially get some money back on that deal we just shared, but also the fact that when I buy into a dip, I can be confident that this is going to make a comeback into a new bull market cycle or move. And that might happen sooner rather than later. We don't know when things are going to be cooling off in the tariff trade war type situation, right? We don't know when markets are going to have more of an appetite to be risk on and toss some cash at these types of assets and products. So things might feel really bearish right now, but again, buy when there's blood in the streets, buy when everyone's crying about things, and focus on creating a game plan for yourself on where you would like to enter. Personally, I believe we're still in a longer term bull market. We're just going to have a bit more of a lag. This is a standard deviation from the norm, if you will, okay? This is not normal what's happening. Typically, crypto markets would have already been close to top by now, but if anything, this might have just prolonged the market by a year. It's going to trade more and more like your TradFi markets or your older markets with more money in them. That's what happens when markets mature. And so over the long run, players like Ripple are set to do extremely well, whether that comes at the end of the year in 2025 or sometime in 2026, even if we experience a bit more downside, which is why, again, it's nice to have a bit of cash and it's nice to prepare to buy some dips when they come our way. I still believe we might have a little bit further downside, potentially down to 150 or even 110, which is why I'm sharing this in the video. That said, there is a lot of positive news and developments, right? We had Paul Atkins confirmed at the SEC, very pro crypto. We had Ripple and the SEC just hit the brakes on their legal war over XRP. Both sides asked the court. In other words, both are working together now. Both are asking for the same thing. The court to pause proceedings as they inch toward a final deal. And it's not just talks. They've got an agreement and they've slashed it obviously to $50 million. But this news just came out, I believe, like yesterday. So I'm sharing with it with you today. And not only is this thing officially over, but it's beyond over. And I hope that this is probably the last time or the second to last time I ever share anything on this again, because I believe sometime on the 16th, we're going to get more news on what's actually occurring over there. And then that will be it, which should open the floodgates for businesses to use Ripple and XRPL technology. And so I want to close this video with this bullish post from A Pomp, who is one of those Bitcoin guys, but also this is going to matter for the entire crypto market. So let's have a listen to what he believes is going to happen in 2025. And by the way, if this happens for Bitcoin, mark my words, it's going to happen for XRP and probably even more so.
Stocks are going down because people are fearful, right? You see the extreme fear and the fear and greed gauges, all that kind of stuff. So if that's the case, there's one X factor in all of this. I don't know if it'll happen, but what the administration is saying, and I'm just listening to what they're saying because that's their plan. They claim that they are going to give the largest tax cut in history to people who make $150,000 or less, not to billionaires and rich people. Like, by the way, Trump's been horrible for billionaires. I think they lost in the last 3 days. They lost like $500 billion, right? Yeah. Or collectively $7 trillion since he came into office, $500 billion just in the last 3 days. So like the whole idea of like, hey, everyone's getting rich, the exact opposite's happening. Like they actually are pretty pissed at him. But I had never heard a politician say, I want to give a tax cut to 150,000 or less. Now they're claiming that they're going to try to get federal income tax level to 0. Again, feels like shock and awe. And then maybe they can give some sort of tax cut. So if you can go from, call it, 30-ish% depending on the different income levels, and you can get down to 20%. Imagine if you could cut 1/3 of the federal income tax bill for every single American, which is like 80% of Americans or something make $150,000 or less. Put more money into their pockets. Right? Like that would be incredible. And so if you look at this and you say, okay, the stock market is coming down, yes, but I personally believe we will have stock all-time highs and Bitcoin all-time highs before the end of 2025.
Wow.
And so people are like fearful, but guess what's going to happen? The Fed has to cut. I'm not predicting that they're going to do an emergency rate cut, but I think the odds of an emergency rate cut have significantly increased over the last 4 days.
So there you have it, folks. They are likely going to cut rates at the Fed in response to all of the fear and uncertainty and market sell-off. And if that happens, yes, we are likely seeing newer lows. However, having a bit of cash on the sideline, I think, is probably the best play because in the long term, we are still likely in a bull run, especially when you look at something like XRP, pump this hard in maintaining a range for this long going back to December. Or even a Bitcoin, when you look at this chart, how beautiful is that longer term uptrend? If anything, consistently hitting these ranges to buy dips is a really smart move, especially when I pull up, let's just say, a 200 EMA. That 200 EMA consistently seems to be a range where anytime we're below the range, you might want to buy a dip, and that includes on all major altcoins that you like, but more importantly, players like XRP that are going to be here for a long time. If I had to predict on any cryptos being around over the next decade, there's so few I could say that yes, they will be. XRP is one of them, Bitcoin is one of them, and then there are probably like a few more, but even then, I'm uncertain. So with that said, thanks so much for watching the video. And if you haven't already, head on down to the link below, bullrunners.com/altcoin secrets, in order to get access to this free book where we share with you how to become a crypto millionaire. Obviously, we can't guarantee that you're going to get that result, but I've shared everything that I possibly know about picking the right altcoins inside of this book, and it's really got a lot of cool information and the 23 secrets to getting access to some of the best crypto plays on the planet. Here are some reviews from some of our clients, and when you click give me access, just enter your email. It'll be sent directly to your inbox. So thanks so much for watching the video. Be sure to hit those 2 links ASAP, and I will see you in the next video, my friend. Goodbye.